Let me take you back to the most terrifying day of my life. A day I'll never forget. I was born and raised in the Northern Territory, and I've always loved the outdoors. Fishing was my escape, my way of disconnecting from the world and reconnecting with nature. But in the top end, you always know there's danger lurking just beneath the surface. I thought I understood that. I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. But before we begin, sit comfortably, dim the lights, turn the volume up, and listen to what the world has to say. Now, let's begin. It was a sweltering day in the NT. One of those days where the heat clings to your skin and makes everything feel heavier. By late afternoon, I decided I needed some time by the river. I packed my gear, a good rod, my tackle box, and a cooler with a few beers, and headed out to my favorite spot on the Adelaide River. It's a stunning place, but also a dangerous one. Crocs rule these waters, and I respected that. The evening was beautiful, the water was calm, and the sun was setting, painting the river in deep reds and oranges. I'd already caught a few decent sized barramundi and was feeling pretty satisfied. I decided to cast one last line before calling it a night. I was standing ankle deep at the riverbank, the cool water lapping against my boots. It felt peaceful, too peaceful maybe. That's when I noticed it. At first, it was just a ripple, a small movement in the water that caught my eye. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a fish or a floating log, but something about it felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. You know that instinct, that deep, primal sense that something isn't right. That's what I felt. Still, I ignored it. I was tired and ready to head home. A mistake I'll regret forever. It happened so fast. I didn't even have time to scream. 1 second, I was standing there, focused on my line. The next, the water exploded around me. A massive crocodile, at least 5 meters long, launched itself out of the river. Its jaws clamped into my leg with a force I can't even describe. It felt like being caught in a vice, like my bones were being crushed into dust. I screamed, a sound I didn't even recognize as my own. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, but the fear was worse. The croc started dragging me into the water, and that's when the real nightmare began. It didn't just pull me, it spun me. The infamous death roll. The water became a violent blur, and I was completely disoriented. Blood clouded the river, and the only thing I could hear was the thrashing of the water and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I thought, this is it. This is how I die. But I wasn't ready to die. Somewhere in the chaos, a thought cut through the panic. Go for the eyes. I'd heard it before, maybe from an old bushman or in some survival guide. Crocodiles are armored tanks, but their eyes are vulnerable. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I reached for the croc's head. Its scales were rough and slick with water, and for a moment I couldn't find the eyes. The thing thrust harder, its jaws tightening around my leg. The pain was unbearable. But then I found them. Two soft, slimy orbs amidst the beast's armored skull. I pressed my thumbs in as hard as I could. The croc let out a gradual roar, a sound so deep and primal it made my blood run cold. It thrust wildly, loosening its grips just enough for me to yank my leg free. I was free, but my leg was shredded, flesh hanging ribbons, and I could see the white of my own bone. The water around me was red, and I knew the croc wasn't done with me yet. The croc came at me again, its jaws snapping inches from my face. I kicked it with my good leg, landing a solid blow on its snout. It flinched just long enough for me to make my move. I scrambled towards the riverbank, using my arms to draw myself out of the water. Every inch felt like a mile. When I finally collapsed onto the dirt, I thought I was safe. But the nightmare wasn't over. Blood was pouring out my leg, pooling beneath me. I knew I had to stop that bleeding, or I wouldn't make it far. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with my belt, wrapping it around my thigh and pulling it as tight as I could. The pain was blinding, but it slowed the bleeding. For now. I looked around. I was alone, deep in the wilderness, miles from help. The only way out was to crawl. The next few hours were a blur of pain and determination. Every movement was agony. The ground was rough, covered in sharp rocks and sticks that tore at my hands and arms. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I kept telling myself, one more inch, just one more inch. The night was alive with sounds. Every rustle in the bushes made my heart race. I kept imagining the croc following me, or worse, another one waiting for its chance. I didn't dare look back. The darkness felt endless, but then, at the first light of dawn, I heard it, the low rumble of an engine, a ranger's truck. I've never been so relieved in my life. I waved weakly, and the truck screeched at a stop. The ranger jumped out, his face a mix of shock and urgency. He got me into the truck and sped off towards the nearest hospital. I don't remember much after that, just flashes of the ride and the overwhelming relief of knowing I'd survived. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive. My leg was a mess, but they managed to save it, barely. I spent months in recovery, and I'll carry the scars for the rest of my life, both physical and emotional. To this day, I can still hear the sounds of the croc's roar and feel the crushing pressure of its jaws. I don't go near rivers anymore, not even to fish. And when people ask me about that day, I tell them the truth. I faced the king of the river, I say, and lived to tell the tale. But I always end with this. The river doesn't belong to us. It belongs to them. Respect that, or you might not get a second chance. And remember, you can always reach me on real@gameacademics.vip. Thank you everybody, and good night.